The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. The earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Earth, the air, the fire, the water, return, 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 return. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Welcome to the virtual manifestation of the First Unitarian Church of Hamilton. Whoever you are, whomever you love, you are welcome in this worship space.
We gather in this moment. Let us acknowledge that the history of what we call Canada includes the regretful and tragic treatment of the Aboriginal peoples, who were careful stewards of the land when the first settlers arrived. Those of us who are not Indigenous people benefit from that history. As we acknowledge the historical and current colonial presence here, let us commit to healing the harm and being in right relations with the Indigenous peoples from whom the land was taken.
We acknowledge our need to address racism that has led and continues to lead to violent deaths of Blacks and Indigenous people. And we acknowledge that anti-Black racism and settler colonialism create and perpetuate inequalities, injustices, poverty, and exclusion in Canadian society. We commit ourselves to becoming an anti-racist faith community dedicated to equity and racial justice. Our goal in this congregation is to extend our hearts in welcome to whomever you may be. We are connected through our desire to live out our ideals of peace, love, and equity. We are here to love one another and encourage each other in our spiritual growth. Our chalice is a reminder of the light and hope of our faith. We light it each time we gather to remind us of the sacredness of our time together. As Victoria lights the chalice, I invite everyone to recite our Unison chalice lighting words. May this flame be our light of friendship and love. Our opening reading for today is one you've heard at least once before because it's become my favorite, and I used it in the service that I did a few weeks ago with Reverend Kirsten. So this is a poem entitled Remembering Tomorrow. It's written by Reverend Teresa Soto. Can we develop the skill of remembering the future? Can we commit to build a community that will extend into a time that we only know by memory because it will outlast us? Memorize the compass points of the day that are yet to come. The truth, the love, the fire, the endless yes on the horizon. Shake the scales from your imagination. Reach, stretch, rise. There is no more time for pretending. You can mourn, grief being more real at times than the promise of the sunrise, more real than the peace of the earth, the peace of the moon. That by inconstant silver turns, disappears, and yet, while we may mourn changes, losses, deceptions, and betrayals, beneath the ash we find the ember. We weep, and as we have learned from labor movements, we organize. Remember the day toward which we gather, the tomorrow towards which we advance. It is with your actions today that you engage that muscle memory, that sense of smell, the ragged velvet feel of a day that you have never lived, It is also your day. Remember it well. These words of reflection are entitled A Prayer for Living Intention by Joseph M. Cherry. If we have any hope of transforming the world and changing ourselves, we must be bold enough to step into our discomfort, brave enough to forgive ourselves and others. May we as a people of faith be granted the strength to be so bold, so brave, and so loving. I invite you to take some time for reflection. It may be a bumpy ride coming up, so take this time to center yourselves.
Number 21, For the Beauty of the Earth. For the beauty of the earth, for the splendor of the skies, for the love which from our birth over and around us lies, source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of ear and eye, for the heart and mind's delight, for the mystic harmony, linking sense to sound and sight, source of all, to thee we raise this our grateful hymn of praise. For the wonder of each hour of the day and of the night, hill and vale and tree and flower, sun and moon and stars of light, source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise. For the joy of human care, sister, brother, parent, child, for the kinship we all share, for all gentle thoughts and mild, source of all, to thee we raise this our hymn of grateful praise.
Our story for all ages this morning is Say Something by Peter H. Reynolds. The world needs your voice. Mine? Yes, yours. Go ahead. It doesn't need to be perfect, as long as it's from your heart. You don't have to be loud. Powerful words can be a whisper. You can say something in so many ways, with words, with action, with creativity. If you see someone lonely, say something by just being there for them. If you see an empty canvas, say something with your brush. If you see an empty lot, say something by planting a seed and watching it bloom. If you see someone being hurt, say something by being brave. Hey, stop. If you see something beautiful, say something with a poem. And if you have a brilliant idea, say something with confidence. Eureka! If you want to show the world who you are, say something with style. Ta-da! If you are angry, say something to help people understand. You made me feel invisible, and that really hurt. I'm really sorry. If you see an injustice, say something peacefully and inspire others to do the same. Sometimes you'll say something and no one will be listening, but keep saying what is in your heart and you will find someone who listens. Keep saying it and you may be surprised to find the whole world listening. If you are grateful for being alive, quietly say something to the stars and to the universe. And some people find it easier to say something than others, but everyone has something to say. So when you're ready, say something. It's the end of our story this morning.
Sheila Van Lutsen has written a little play called Climate Conversations, and Rachel and I are going to read a few sections from that play for you today. Dry, so dry, the land we farm for generations is rutted like rivers, but no water flows through them, jagged claws that ravage the once fertile soil.
Burning, burning. Our land is on fire. Animals, trees, homes ablaze. Days so hot we suffocate. No relief at night. Mother Nature's revenge for our blindness to her pain.
I've heard there are young people taking to the streets, raising their hands and voices, demonstrating for climate justice. They say, we're rising. My generation is rising for the planet on the streets, in the parks, at the seats of power. We won't back down. In 2019, the documentary There's Something in the Water premiered at TIFF, Toronto International Film Festival. Produced by actor Ellen Page, the documentary exposed the shameful history and devastating effects of environmental racism in Nova Scotia. Although the result of a toxic cluster of industrial and governmental policies and practices, few white Nova Scotians knew anything of this. Most Black and Indigenous Nova Scotians did. Parents like Pages lived just miles away from the scene of crimes against the environment and against Black and Indigenous people, but they knew nothing of it.
Environmental racism is a problem. In Canada, your postal code determines your health. So we know that where you live has bearing on your well-being. Indigenous and Black communities are the ones that tend to be located near hazardous sites.
When we got here, they decided they were going to put a dump where everything went. There was body parts, there was food, animals, anything and everything.
There were concerns about the impact on the environment.
That's what our community smells like. In one view, in one instant, you'll realize why we are here.
How environmental racism has affected this community. It's killing us. This lady's husband died of cancer. All the family that lived in this house died of cancer. This man has cancer. Who knows what's in our water?
The trust has been broken through several governments.
Talk to us!
Step back or you're going to get arrested.
You are poisoning our water.
It's just another example of their disregard for our rights.
They're doing it, and they're not even tricking us. They're just doing it now.
Canada is not a nation. It's a corporation.
And it's time for it to stop.
The bottom line is that we're sick of being sick. We hope to heal from all this.
To truly achieve an equitable, fair, and greener future, we must defend Black lives and our climate future together.
Environmental racism is the condition, is the problem of disproportionate exposure of Indigenous communities, Black communities, other communities of color to environmental burdens, to pollutants and contaminants. But it's also about the slow response by government, right, to address these issues. What we know is that where you live has bearing on your well-being. In Canada, your postal code determines your health. So we know that certain communities are less healthy because of where they live. Most African Nova Scotians live in historical African Nova Scotian communities, which are rural communities, and many of them are near landfills. And we know Indigenous communities as well are the ones that tend to be disproportionately located near to these hazardous sites. When you're living in out-of-the-way, invisible communities that often lack a voice, that are invisible to government, then often your voice isn't heard. You have to look at environmental racism within the context of the history of Nova Scotia, within the context of colonialism in Nova Scotia and Canada. There is a reluctance, a hesitance in Canada to name racism. Racism embeds itself into all of our social structures, and in Canada, we tend to steer clear of that. Racism and environmental racism have real impacts on the ground with respect to these particular communities. It has impacted Black and Indigenous communities socially, economically, and politically. When you look at particular communities as not being worthy, of having no humanity, of not being valuable, which is how we typically think of non-white peoples, then it makes sense in many ways that you're not going to respond in the similar way as you would with a white community, because these communities don't mean anything to you, to individuals. So I think there's a detachment, is if you're not taking time to meet communities and get a sense of their priorities, their experiences, their challenges will never get written into environmental policy. It requires that you listen to these communities, and that's typically what's not happening.
Naomi Klein says in On Fire, The Case for the Green New Deal, "We have been trained to see our issues in silos. They never belonged there. When one tugs at a single thing in nature, one finds it attached to the rest of the world." That quote's by John Muir. And Kanuli Sarawi says, "We either win this war to save our land, or we will be exterminated because we have nowhere else to run to."
Pre-pollution, what we now know is Boat Harbor was called Oseg. Oseg means the other room. It was the place that our community members ran to when the Indian agents used to come to collect kids. They used to run to Oseg. So Oseg, and one of our elders says it so eloquently one time, was like a parent to them. They protected them. They fed them when they were hungry. They kept shelter, and when the mill came along in 1965 and started their very intentful plan to infiltrate our land and our Oseg, all that was taken away. All that was taken away.
In 1965, the Scott Paper Company wanted to build a pulp and paper mill in Nova Scotia. They knew exactly where they wanted to go. the town of Pictou. It was their consultant, Dr. John Bates, who had selected the site a few years earlier. This is what he proposed: that Scott Paper build a craft pulp mill. The waste for the mill would be piped under Pictou Harbor and dumped into Boat Harbor. Eventually, the industrial waste would make its way into the ocean. By the time this was proposed, Dr. Bates was no longer a consultant for Scott. He had become the head of the Nova Scotia Water Authority. Everything was in place for a very lucrative deal between Scott Paper and the province of Nova Scotia. The government agreed to look after the waste from the mill and began buying up land in the area. The only problem was the Indians, who lived on the edge of Boat Harbor.
The Water Authority had approached my grandfather, who was chief at the time, and the council, and said, yeah, well, we want to bring this mill here. Yeah, don't worry about, everything's going to be great. It'll be a freshwater lake. It's not going to impact, anything. There was documented concerns about, the impact on the environment, the impact on their fisheries. So they were, raising the concerns, as our leadership, have done for decades. So once they found out that we were, worried about these things, we'll just, we'll take them on a trip. They went and they took my grandfather and another councillor, Martin Sapir, to a place in New Brunswick, which wasn't even a treatment facility similar to the one that they were building.
Mr. Wigglesworth come down, took us up St. John's or Lancaster, whatever we want to call it, pulp mill up there. Yeah. And he showed us that there was no discolor in the water, no odor.
He showed you there was no discolor in the water.
Discolor in the water. There's no odor or anything coming out of that pulp mill.
The smoke here is from the pulp mill in St. John. But the Indians were never taken there. All they were shown was a water treatment plant for domestic sewage a few miles away.
That was, a facade in itself. And, spewed some lies to them, made them, try and understand that, it's not going to impact this. It's going to be a lake. You're still going to be able to enjoy it, recreation. You're still going to be able to do the things, that you want to do. And there were conditions. There were conditions in the agreement that were totally ignored. They wanted to know for sure, what's the impacts, and that was never followed through with. The only thing that was followed through with was $60,000. $60,000 back then to an oppressed community that's, been, suffering under the impacts of, residential school, and it was a lot. I can just imagine what was going through my grandfather's mind. I'm doing so, oh my God, the environment isn't going to be impacted. I feel for the county. I feel for, I'm helping. Nothing bad is going to come out of this. My grandfather, right there in New Brunswick, along with Martin Sapir, signed on a piece of paper. A piece of paper, right then and there, they had him.
We abuse the land because we regard it as a commodity belonging to us. When we see land as a community to which we belong, then we may begin to use it with love and respect. Aldo Leopold. Unceasing rains drown our seeds, kill our cattle, wash away our homes. We prayed for rain in the dry days, but not these fierce floods. Stay or flee, such heartbreaking choices.
Birds float above the flames, but below, koalas and kangaroos flee the flames on foot. Few survive, millions perish. Yet we burn coal, and Mother Nature sends us a fiery reckoning.
And children say, we're skipping school to rally for change. Fridays for future. What future? Too hot to handle our warming world. But we'll keep marching, keep rallying for our own lives. We won't back down for remaining silent when a single voice would have made a difference. For each time that our fears have made us rigid and inaccessible. For each time that we have struck out in anger without just cause. For each time that that our greed has blinded us to the needs of others, for the selfishness that sets us apart and alone, for falling short of the admonitions of the Spirit, for losing sight of our unity, for those and for so many acts, both evident and subtle, which have fueled the illusion of separateness. For all these things, we challenge ourselves and each other to do better. We commit ourselves to being better.
When I first started in farming, I really thought I would be all alone out here in the woods because people told me that Black and brown folks don't want to farm if they have a choice. My name is Leah Penniman, and I am the farm manager and co-director at Soulfire Farm in Grafton, New York. Soulfire Farm is an Afro-Indigenous centered community farm that's dedicated to uprooting racism in the food system. When you look at who came up with a lot of the technology sustainable farmers use, like raised beds, cover crops, polycultures, compost, those have Afro-Indigenous roots. And so I think it's very important to uplift that it's very much an us thing as Black and brown folks to be engaged in the work of agriculture, the work of healing and repairing our relationship with the earth. Racism and white supremacy are really built into the DNA of the US food system, beginning with the genocidal theft of land from Native Americans, continuing with the kidnapping of my own ancestors from the shores of West Africa to do forced agricultural labor, and then maturing into its current form where farm management is actually among the whitest professions in the United States, and being a farm laborer is among the brownest. So one of our programs is the Solidarity Share doorstep delivery of fresh food to people who need it in the community. And we prioritize people impacted by incarceration, immigration policies, and other forms of state violence. And we've established a program for aspiring Black and brown farmers. They come to the farm when it's not a pandemic for a week-long 50-hour course that covers everything from soil to harvest to marketing, as well as the beautiful ancestral practices we have of creating sustainable food systems. The federal government will define a high poverty area with no grocery stores as a food desert. We prefer the term food apartheid because there's nothing natural about a situation where your zip code is the #1 determiner of your life expectancy. We have a Soulfire in the City gardening program that builds raised bed boxes for families under food apartheid. So we're providing the lumber, the soil, the seeds, the plants, as well as a whole community of support to these aspiring gardeners. I feel really excited to be alive right now in this time of awakening and reckoning. The very same systems that lead to police brutality and mass incarceration are the systems that lead to food apartheid. But anything that can be created can also be undone. We can create a world where the land is shared, where everyone has access to food and clean water. I'm hopeful that this generation can work together to create a truly equitable society.
The earth is our mother. We must take care of her. The earth is our mother. We must take care of her.
This is my reclamation of my ancestral wisdom. The earth, it saved it for me, and I plant the seed.
earth is our mother. We must take care of her. The earth is our mother. We must take care of her. We extinguish the flame, but carry the fire of commitment with us.